Lewis Hamilton is back with Mercedes after Ferrari's shocking decision to drop him. If this is news to you, and you want to know why, this video is just for you. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. What initially promised to be the most iconic and emotionally charged transition in modern Formula One, a legendary champion donning the scarlet red of Ferrari, has disintegrated in spectacular fashion, triggering a series of consequences so explosive that not even the most seasoned paddock insiders could have anticipated the magnitude of what is now unfolding. The fairy tale narrative of Lewis Hamilton's much-publicized move to Maranello for 2025 has not only collapsed, it's imploded from the inside out, the result of a behind-the-scenes betrayal buried in the fine print of confidential agreements, violated by whispers Ferrari never expected to be heard, yet exposed with precision by a team that has built its legacy on leaving nothing to chance. The seven-time world champion is not just walking away from Ferrari, he is returning to Mercedes with immediate effect, not as a nostalgic reunion, but as a man on a mission to reclaim what was nearly rewritten without him. It all began with what seemed like a minor technicality, a protective clause embedded in Hamilton's transitional contract, designed not only to shield his influence in the developmental structure at Ferrari, but to ensure that no internal discussions about alternate driver options could be initiated without his direct acknowledgement. The exclusivity language was clear. Hamilton was to be the central figure in every aspect of the 2025 campaign, both competitively and corporately. And yet, deep within a series of encrypted emails and time-stamped internal memos, a thread emerged. Discreet negotiations with Carlos Sainz have been reignited. A conversation that may have started as contingency planning quickly evolved into something far more concrete. The use of phrases like insurance scenario, plan beta, and alternate onboarding path were enough to set alarm bells blaring inside Hamilton's legal team, who acted swiftly and ruthlessly, initiating a contractual exit without hesitation or warning. Ferrari, completely blindsided, scrambled to regain control. Frederic Vasseur, who had previously assured Hamilton and his entourage that no side negotiations would occur, found himself summoned to an impromptu emergency discussion with Hamilton's representatives in a secured conference suite behind the Miami paddock. The atmosphere inside that room, according to sources with direct knowledge, was pure frost. Hamilton didn't shake hands. He didn't smile. He arrived flanked by two legal experts and a silent observer from Liberty Media, whose presence alone spoke volumes about the broader implications. No negotiations were entertained. No apologies accepted. It was a precise surgical extraction, the emotional equivalent of slamming a door shut and locking it forever. The final nail was driven with a single line spoken by Hamilton before departing the room: "You had your chance." Within hours, Mercedes had already mobilized. A private jet departed from Brackley, landing in Miami under the radar. Hamilton, without fanfare or official statement, boarded quietly. When he arrived at the circuit the following morning, he entered through the back entrance of the Mercedes paddock unit, bypassing cameras and reporters. Inside, he sat for over 3 hours with key figures from the Brackley Brain Trust, strategists, aerodynamicists, and simulator engineers, reintegrating with a kind of confidence and calm that suggested he had never truly left. The atmosphere inside the building was electrified. Veterans who had celebrated 6 world titles with him stood up from their desks. Several engineers reportedly broke down in tears. One longtime team member told a journalist under condition of anonymity, "The moment he walked in, the air changed. Everyone stood straighter. No one said it out loud, but we all felt it. This isn't the end. This is a reset." Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. At the same time, chaos was erupting inside Maranello. Internal communication collapsed. The team's chain of command fractured. Mechanics learned of Hamilton's exit via leaked media reports, not official channels. The mood among staff was described as funeral-like. Sainz, who had gone from discarded to potentially re-signed, now found himself in an ambiguous limbo, surrounded by silent engineers and awkward handshakes. Leclerc, caught completely off guard, reportedly confronted Vasseur directly in a tense private discussion that left both men visibly shaken. Sponsors began dialing the Ferrari switchboard demanding explanations. Puma cancelled a scheduled photo shoot. Shell executives scheduled an emergency conference call. And in the marketing department, a group of junior staffers was allegedly instructed to begin removing Hamilton-branded content from all future campaigns immediately and discreetly. Social media, meanwhile, detonated. Formula One's digital landscape transformed into a tsunami of disbelief, celebration, and fury. Hamilton's loyal supporters celebrated his return as a resurrection. Ferrari traditionalists lamented a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity lost to mismanagement and arrogance. TikTok was flooded with dramatic edits, Instagram was overrun with speculation, and X, formerly Twitter, collapsed under the weight of trending hashtags like #HamiltonHome, #FerrariCollapse, and #Toto Masterstroke. In less than 24 hours, Liberty Media's global F1 engagement figures spiked by 38%. Viewership expectations for the next Grand Prix shattered projections. Behind the scenes, executives were already discussing contract renegotiations with broadcasters to account for the sudden surge in global interest. Toto Wolff's involvement in the rapid reinstatement of Hamilton has already been described as military-grade precision. The Mercedes boss, who had played the role of steady captain during Hamilton's departure, never allowed emotion to override strategy. According to internal sources, Wolff maintained discreet contact with Hamilton's agency throughout his Ferrari negotiations, preparing for the slim possibility that something might go wrong. When it did, he was ready, not with contingency plans, but with a complete reintegration package. Within 2 days of Hamilton's exit from Ferrari, Mercedes had updated their driver roster, reorganized their simulator development plan, and finalized new branding materials that reintroduced Hamilton into the team's long-term roadmap. And while the public waited for a polished statement or choreographed photo op, Hamilton's first act upon returning wasn't a social media post or an interview, it was a 3-hour simulator session behind closed doors. Alone in the cockpit. Full telemetry access. Direct input into the 2025 prototype chassis development. No press. No distractions. Just work. Those close to the team said it was the most focused they had seen him in years. When asked how he felt to be back, Hamilton reportedly replied, "It's not about how it feels. It's about what comes next." Ferrari's leadership vacuum now looms over the team like a storm cloud. Vasseur's position is reportedly under review. Leclerc's camp has reached out to external legal advisors to examine potential exit clauses in his contract. Sainz, still technically without a deal for 2025, has reignited talks with Audi and Aston Martin. Internal morale has cratered. Several members of Ferrari's Aero team have already been approached by rival teams with recruitment offers. Rumors swirl of silent resignations and anonymous leaks. The once proud Scuderia, who had hoped to return to glory with Hamilton leading the charge, now faces its most humiliating public failure in decades. Meanwhile, back in Brackley, the mood is one of defiant optimism. Hamilton's return has galvanized not just the team but the entire Mercedes-AMG Petronas F1 organization. Engineers are working longer hours. Factory production has accelerated. The cafeteria is full again. And inside the simulator room, a single name has been re-added to the top of the data screen: Lewis. The comeback is no longer hypothetical. It's happening in real time. Quietly. Relentlessly. Without fanfare. Without apologies. In a room built for diplomacy but drowned in tension, the conversation between Lewis Hamilton and Frederic Vasseur unfolded not as a negotiation, but as an autopsy of trust. It was cold, clinical, and irreversible. No camera crews, no legal advisors, just two men surrounded by silence and the unbearable weight of unspoken fractures. The air felt stale, the kind of suffocating stillness that precedes a storm, and both knew, before a word was spoken, that what had been carefully constructed over months was now on the verge of total collapse. Vasseur began cautiously, trying to salvage what little remained of a once-celebrated alliance. His tone was measured, almost too calm, as though emotion might push things further off the edge. "Lewis, this isn't what you think it is," he said, leaning forward as though proximity might bridge the gap between honesty and perception. The conversations with Carlos weren't active negotiations. They were merely strategic precautions. Nothing more. Hamilton's eyes, steady and piercing, didn't flicker. His body remained still, but his silence roared louder than any accusation. When he finally responded, it was with surgical precision, not rage. "You crossed the only boundary I made clear," he said, voice low and heavy. "I left everything behind for this seat. I put my legacy in your hands. And you treated it like a plan B." Vasseur's reply came fast, desperate to pull the moment back from the brink. "We can fix this. We'll revisit the terms. Rewrite the expectations. There's room to adjust." But Hamilton's expression didn't change. His voice turned to ice. "You don't get to edit betrayal after the fact." Without raising his voice or uttering another word, Hamilton rose. The legs of his chair scraped across the floor with quiet finality. He didn't offer a handshake, didn't wait for further defense. He turned and exited, leaving Vasseur in a room that suddenly felt much larger, much emptier, and unbearably quiet. The fallout was immediate and private. Hamilton's management made no official statement, but behind encrypted calls and silent emails, the paddock began to stir. Word reached Brackley before the hour was over. Within minutes, Toto Wolff was pulled from a financial review meeting by a team liaison holding a phone with an urgent message. He glanced at the screen, read the text once, then stood up without a word, walked to his assistant's office, and gave a single instruction: prep the jet. "I need to be wheels up in 90. The aircraft left London airspace just after midnight. On board, Wolff wasn't reviewing spreadsheets or staring at wind tunnel data. He was thinking about timing, about history, about what it meant for the man who had given him 7 titles to suddenly be free again. No PR strategy, no legal scaffolding, just instinct, opportunity, and history knocking on the door. When Wolff and Hamilton met again, it wasn't in front of cameras or in the confines of a boardroom. It was a high-security penthouse suite in Miami, booked under a corporate alias, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the coastline. The moment was quiet, stripped of formality. Hamilton stood by the window when Wolff entered, hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the horizon as though trying to make sense of the chaos behind and ahead. Wolff closed the door gently behind him, then crossed the room. He didn't sit. He didn't offer a rehearsed welcome. He simply said what needed saying. "I didn't expect it to end like this," his voice soft, vulnerable in a way that only history allows. "But I never locked the door behind you." Hamilton turned, and for the first time in months, his expression softened, not with joy, but with the relief of clarity. "I'm not here for apologies or slogans," he said. "No politics. No layers of spin. Just the drive. Let's finish what we never got to complete." Wolff nodded slowly, the emotion settling into a familiar place between them. "Then it's settled," he said. "Let's bring you home." What followed was not a typical contract negotiation. It was a wartime mobilization. Mercedes issued a Level 3 internal reorganization alert, something reserved for extreme shifts in operations. Mick Schumacher's development schedule was frozen immediately. Engineering resources were redirected from simulator enhancements to chassis adjustments. W15-07, previously designated for prototype testing, was rerouted for urgent modifications to meet Hamilton's cockpit profile, telemetry demands, and physical specifications down to the millimeter. Engineers worked through the night. Aerodynamicists reviewed data logs from Hamilton's final races with a team to rebuild the environment exactly as he'd left it. Even his former race engineer was reactivated under confidential orders. At the same time, secure shipments were dispatched from Stuttgart, including new driver suits, telemetry gear, and a redesigned steering wheel interface customized to Hamilton's driving style. His personal trainers, physiotherapist, and logistics team were flown in on short notice. Track simulations were rerun to reflect his return, and briefing documents were rewritten to accommodate his re-entry. Internally, a one-line directive circulated quietly through Mercedes' chain of command. Reintegration protocol confirmed. Driver number 44 reactivated. At Ferrari, the impact was seismic. Vasseur retreated into a storm of closed-door meetings. Marketing campaigns featuring Hamilton in Ferrari red were pulled instantly. Legal departments braced for potential fallout over confidential breach concerns. Carlos Sainz, who had been kept in the dark, demanded a private audience with Ferrari's executive board. Leclerc, typically diplomatic, skipped an internal media session for the first time all season. The paddock's mood turned somber. Ferrari's dream of pairing the most successful driver in the sport's history with their team had imploded not with a public statement, but with a quiet exit that echoed louder than any podium celebration. Elsewhere, Red Bull found themselves caught between reaction and regret. Their slow courtship of Hamilton had come too late. Christian Horner was said to have held a private call with senior advisors, not to discuss how they missed the opportunity, but how they underestimated the speed with which Mercedes would reclaim their king. Helmut Marko's comments to close allies were even more pointed: he was never really gone. He just needed a reason to return. In Miami, the news hadn't yet gone public, but the energy had already shifted. Reporters sensed something, cameras lingered longer on the Mercedes garage, and rival teams began whispering strategies under their breath, recalculating everything. Hamilton wasn't coming back as a relic. He was returning as the spark, the storm, the final variable that could rewrite an entire season. Not to relive past glory, but to leave no doubt about who he truly is when the noise falls away and the lights go out. The chaos left behind in the wake of Hamilton's sudden reversal has metastasized into a full-blown crisis behind Ferrari's usually impenetrable walls. Inside Maranello, the fallout has gone from disbelief to discontent to full-scale damage control, with Charles Leclerc at the emotional epicenter. The Monegasque driver, who had once envisioned himself forming the most iconic pairing of the modern era alongside the seven-time champion, has been left to pick through the debris of a project that collapsed before it even left the ground. Meetings once filled with optimism now drip with frustration. Engineers speak in hushed tones. PR teams redact content by the hour. Hamilton's absence isn't just a vacancy on the team's future roster, it's a gaping public humiliation. For Leclerc, the psychological toll has been corrosive. He was never informed of Hamilton's breach until the story had already circulated across news feeds and private paddock whispers. When the official briefing reached him, delivered not by a senior executive, but by a communications liaison scrambling to contain a storm, the reaction was one of stunned silence. Not anger. Not panic. Just a long, quiet pause that ended with a cold, almost surgical question. When did he make the decision? No one had a real answer. And that silence spoke volumes. Later, in the shadows of the Ferrari garage, away from the microphones and press flashbulbs, Leclerc turned to his race engineer. His words weren't yelled. They weren't even sharp. They were weary, deliberate, and devastating. They brought in a legend and lost him before he even walked through the door. What does that say about us? The reply came slowly, with the weight of months of technical disappointment hanging behind it. It means we're not moving fast enough. Leclerc didn't hesitate. Then we'll keep watching the ones who matter slip away. The sentiment echoed throughout the team like a tremor. Leclerc, long seen as Ferrari's golden cornerstone, had never sounded so detached. Days later, he began canceling media obligations, requesting limited press interactions, and skipping internal marketing briefs. His demeanor at the factory changed. He no longer smiled at photographers. His usual afternoon simulator runs extended late into the night, and telemetry analysts reported he was running endless stints, not for testing purposes, but simply out of sheer need for distraction. The optimism of the pre-season was dead, replaced by a hollow rhythm of unspoken disappointment. Over in Brackley, the atmosphere was no less volatile. Hamilton's decision to return sent shockwaves through every department. What had once been considered a closed chapter, one with commemorative photo books and farewell messages, was suddenly reopened with urgency. The mechanics barely had time to process it. Trackside operations staff were instructed to reintegrate Hamilton-specific protocols. His telemetry dashboard settings had to be reloaded from archived backups. His race prep routines were reinserted into the daily flow like pieces of a puzzle no one thought they'd touch again. And through all of this, George Russell stood at the center of a storm he never saw coming. Russell had been led to believe the future belonged to him. Since Hamilton's departure announcement, he had stepped confidently into the leadership vacuum. Internal meetings centered on his input. Sponsorship campaigns bore his face. He had begun working directly with aero teams on 2026 concepts. And now, with a single phone call from Toto Wolff, all of it was thrown into uncertainty. The tone of the call was businesslike, but the emotional undercurrent was undeniable. "George, we've made a decision," Wolff began. "Lewis will be back, for Imola. It's finalized." The pause that followed felt like an eternity. Russell, usually diplomatic and controlled, responded with restrained disbelief. "I thought the project was moving forward with me as the focal point." Wolff didn't flinch. "It still is. But when the opportunity arises to bring back a driver of his stature, you act. You don't delay. This is competition." Russell, tight-lipped, responded with a rhetorical counterstrike. "So now we navigate another internal battlefield? Another dual leadership scenario?" The answer came with brutal simplicity: you don't need to yield. You just need to elevate. The implications were immediate. Engineers became hesitant. unsure whether to prioritize development paths tailored to Russell's style or resume the historically Hamilton-centric approach. Technical meetings shifted in tone. Some discussions were moved to smaller groups. A quiet territorialism began to emerge, subtle but unmistakable. Data analysts found themselves running double simulations, one for Russell's optimal setup, and one for Hamilton's known preferences. One insider described the environment as simultaneously nostalgic and unstable, like someone resurrecting a legend in the middle of a leadership transition. Russell, for his part, retreated inward. He began requesting private simulator sessions, even as late as 1 a.m., asking for detailed breakdowns of Hamilton's historic sector performances at upcoming tracks. He canceled public appearances, skipped one of Mercedes' main sponsor dinners, and spent over an hour one evening walking the Brackley campus alone, deep in thought. He had no intention of backing down, but the reality was now starkly different. He was no longer building something from scratch. He was sharing space with a myth. Inside Ferrari, things weren't just fragile, they were fracturing. Commercial partners who had invested heavily in the Hamilton-Leclerc vision were livid. Global campaigns had been designed around the idea of two eras colliding in unity. Merchandise lines were halted. Ad spends frozen. One senior executive at a luxury watch brand reportedly threatened to withdraw funding if Ferrari didn't offer a new star replacement within 30 days. The Scuderia's marketing division scrambled to reframe Leclerc as the lone hero, but it was too late. The damage was done. They had sold a dream. Now they were left selling an apology. Internal meetings turned brutal. Voices were raised. Blame was passed. Executives argued over who should have foreseen the exit clause risk. Engineers quietly criticized upper management for relying too heavily on a fairy tale narrative instead of solving aerodynamic instability and strategic misfires. Even lower-tier employees, from hospitality to IT, whispered about the collapse with resignation. The illusion of stability was gone. The FIA watched in silent discomfort. Though no official statement was released, multiple high-ranking individuals began pushing for reforms around public driver commitments. There was talk of contract transparency thresholds, clauses requiring mutual review periods before exits, and early warning mandates to protect sponsors from sudden reversals. The Hamilton case wasn't just a shock, it was a precedent, a blueprint for chaos. And through it all, Leclerc continued to drift. He arrived earlier and earlier to the paddock, but spoke less and less. When journalists approached, he offered one-word answers or polite deferrals. On team radio, his tone had changed, more clipped, less collaborative. In one race simulation, he reportedly stayed silent through an entire stint, only speaking after shutting the engine off in the garage. When asked if something was wrong, he simply said, "Everything's just very loud right now." At Mercedes, Hamilton's reintroduction was quiet, almost eerie in its smoothness. He returned not with grand speeches, but with methodical precision. He reviewed every technical update since his departure. He sat down with each department individually. He asked about wind tunnel progress, cooling solutions, tire behavior under the new floor regulations. He wasn't demanding dominance. He was reclaiming relevance. And everyone felt it. What happens next isn't just about who finishes first. It's about two teams torn between their past and future, one star forced to lead alone, and another suddenly forced to share. And across every garage, every strategy room, and every briefing, there's a quiet question hanging in the air. What happens when greatness returns to a place that's already moved on? The Brackley corridors hum with forced politeness, but beneath the surface, a silent war has begun. George Russell moves through the facility with the precision of a man trying to contain a flood of frustration beneath a carefully composed exterior. He greets engineers, poses for cameras, nods to the interns, but his mind is elsewhere. Those closest to him say he hasn't slept properly in days. Not since the moment the call came in. Not since he learned, not from his team principal, not from a press release, but through a third-party whisper, that Lewis Hamilton was returning to Mercedes, not next year, not someday, but immediately. And that everything Russell had been building toward was suddenly violently in question. Inside Mercedes, the air has changed. Conversations are sharper. Eye contact is shorter. Trust is being rationed. The garage, once structured around calm efficiency and seamless coordination, is now bracing for friction. Not because of personal animosity. Hamilton and Russell have never been at odds, but because two apex-level competitors cannot share space without tension eventually devouring every inch between them. The simulation teams are already adjusting schedules. Data access protocols are under review. Strategic decisions that once flowed in a clear hierarchy now pass through dual layers of ego, legacy, and ambition. Russell isn't angry at Hamilton. He's angry at the system that fed him promises and now expects him to smile as they're broken in real time. The narrative he was sold was one of transition, the student stepping forward, the heir finally taking the throne. That illusion has been shattered. He's not stepping into leadership. He's being pushed back into the shadows by the man whose portrait still hangs in the lobby. And Hamilton? He returns not as a nostalgic figure or a retired hero giving it one last go. He returns with blood in his mouth. He returns with scars unhealed, stories unfinished, and a vendetta against every assumption that he was done. This is not a comeback. This is a reclamation. Of control. Of identity. Of a seat that was never supposed to be his again, now handed back not with ceremony, but necessity. His deal isn't just a driver contract, it's a declaration of influence. Clauses buried deep in legal frameworks reportedly grant him expanded authority not just on development feedback, but on project prioritization, simulator driver selection, and even input on branding direction. This is a partnership in name only. In practice, it's Hamilton rewriting the hierarchy of power inside the team, shifting Mercedes from an engineering-first empire into a performance dynasty orbiting his singular gravitational pull. Engineers who once managed with spreadsheets and torque maps now find themselves navigating diplomacy, locker room psychology, and legacy management. Meetings that once ended with consensus now drift into quiet standoffs. Strategy sessions require extra buffers, new time blocks added just to navigate the possibility that both drivers disagree on a fundamental tactical approach. The tension is not hostile. It's more dangerous than that. It's respectful, civil, polite. But every moment hums with unspoken rivalry, with the understanding that beneath every sentence, there is an alternative meaning, a veiled power move, a battle for who gets to define the team's direction. Marketing departments are operating in emergency mode. Posters scheduled for launch next month now sit shredded on office floors. Television spots shot weeks ago with Russell as the solo focus have been shelved. New campaign scripts are being rewritten at 3 a.m., entire ad teams working around the clock to recenter the narrative around Hamilton. Global sponsors are demanding clarity. Who leads this team? Who do we invest in? Who represents us when the lights go out and the cameras roll? Behind closed doors, corporate partners are leveraging the moment. Hamilton's return brings exposure, record engagement, unmatched reach, cultural relevance. But it also brings volatility. Some brands are enthusiastic, thrilled to align with the most iconic figure of the hybrid era. Others are wary, concerned about the shifting spotlight and the message it sends about Mercedes' future. The balance is delicate. Every brand wants the glory, none want the mess. The FIA has already adjusted entries for Imola. Admin teams worked overnight to ensure registration data matched the breaking developments. Graphics packages are being remade. Commentary teams are rewriting scripts. Media personnel are being reassigned. The machinery of Formula One, built to anticipate everything, now scrambles in real time to accommodate a development that was never supposed to happen. Not this soon. Not like this. And in the paddock, the psychological impact is seismic. Every team feels it. At Red Bull, internal meetings have shifted tone. Verstappen's camp, usually calm, is now watchful. They remember what it's like to share the stage with Hamilton, not just in performance, but in presence. Helmut Marko has reportedly ordered a review of all team communication protocols, including public statements, radio directives, and narrative management. Not to contain Verstappen, but to counter the inevitable flood of attention Hamilton will bring with him. Ferrari is reeling. Imola was meant to be their moment. Home race. Celebratory atmosphere. Full media push. Now, it's all overshadowed. Executives at Maranello are fuming, privately accusing Mercedes of hijacking the calendar. Leclerc, preparing for what was to be his centerpiece race of the season, has reportedly cancelled 2 media days. Sainz has gone quiet. Morale is crumbling. Not because of one race, but because the spotlight, the very currency of Formula One, is once again slipping out of Ferrari's grasp. At McLaren, timelines have been moved forward. Technical departments have pushed through aero upgrades meant for Monaco. New floor concepts are being installed in a rush. Drivers have been pulled from sim sessions to accommodate urgent track walks and performance recalibrations. Team principal Andrea Stella is said to have warned the board that every team not preparing for Hamilton is preparing to lose. Even mid-tier teams are reacting. At Alpine, internal communications reportedly included directives to prepare for higher-pressure midfield battles. At Aston Martin, Alonso has remained uncharacteristically quiet, his PR team declining interviews, his race engineer instructed to deflect Hamilton questions. The entire grid feels the ripple effect. Even those not racing him directly know that every moment, every broadcast frame, every paddock discussion will bend toward one man again. In the depths of the Brackley facility, beneath LED lights and precision-calibrated workstations, a chassis once meant for tomorrow is now being repurposed for a legacy reawakened. A nameplate bearing 44 has been mounted, not ceremoniously, but assertively. Not to honor history, but to remind everyone that history is still being written. Mechanics say the mood is different now. Tighter, focused, urgent. There's no easing into this. No testing phase. No build-up. Hamilton is not returning to find rhythm. He's returning to conquer. Imola will be the first battlefield. But it won't be the last. Every round now carries weight. Every press conference, every DRS zone, every qualifying lap will feel heavier. The cameras will follow. The fans will chant. The critics will sharpen their knives. And in the center of it all, Hamilton will walk not like a man coming back, but like a king reclaiming territory that was never truly lost, only borrowed.